Imagine waking up in a wooden house. There is no electricity, no phone, no soft mattress, no little glowing rectangle beside your bed quietly informing you that you have 17 notifications and somehow still manage to sleep through all of them. Instead, you open your eyes to smoke. A lot of smoke. Your bed is made from rough animal skins. Your blanket smells faintly of wool, wood smoke, and something you decide not to investigate. Above you, the roof is blackened from years of indoor fires. Somewhere nearby, a baby is crying, someone is coughing, someone else is arguing about a missing knife, and then you notice something slightly more concerning. You don't recognize the language. A broad-shouldered man is standing in the doorway. He has a wool tunic, muddy boots, a beard that seems to have its own weather system, and an expression suggesting that you are already late for something. He says a sentence. You stare at him. He stares at you. You both experience the ancient human tradition of silently hoping the other person will somehow solve the problem. Then he points outside. You follow, and there it is, a Viking village, wooden houses, smoke rising into the cold morning air, sheep wandering around as if they own the place, people carrying buckets, a blacksmith hammering away at something, children running through the mud, a dog staring at you with the calm judgment of an animal that has apparently understood the situation better than you have. And somewhere beyond the village, the sea is waiting. You have, unfortunately, woken up in the Viking Age. And before you start imagining yourself standing dramatically on a long ship with an axe in your hand, looking magnificent against the sunrise, there is something important to understand. You probably would not be doing that. You would probably be cold. You would probably be hungry. And you would very quickly discover that Viking life involves significantly more sweeping, farming, cooking, repairing, carrying, cleaning, and worrying about the weather than popular culture usually mentions. So tonight, let's forget the shiny helmets. Actually, Vikings did not normally wear those horn helmets anyway. Let's forget the dramatic movie battles. Let's forget the enormous ships appearing through fog while everyone screams. Instead, dim the lights a little. Get comfortable. Let your shoulders relax. Put your phone somewhere slightly inconvenient. And imagine that you have just opened your eyes in a Viking settlement somewhere in Scandinavia, perhaps around the 10th century. You don't know exactly where you are. You don't know exactly how you got here. And more importantly, you have no idea what anyone is saying. But don't worry. You have nowhere to be. There is no alarm clock. There is no email. There is no boss asking whether you have finished that spreadsheet. There's only the soft crackling of the fire, the smell of smoke, and several centuries of mildly inconvenient problems waiting outside. The first thing you would notice is probably the house. A Viking longhouse was not exactly a cozy little Scandinavian cottage. It was usually long, narrow, and built primarily from timber, with walls made from wood, turf, or wattle and daub depending on location. The roof might be covered with turf or other materials. Inside, there was usually a central hearth. And this hearth was extremely important. It provided warmth. It provided light. It was used for cooking. And it also produced a smoke that slowly turned inside of the building into something resembling the world's least enthusiastic sauna. There was often no chimney in the modern sense. The smoke had to find its way out through openings in the roof. So when you woke up, you might not immediately see the ceiling. You might see smoke. Your eyes would sting. Your clothes would smell like a campfire. Your hair would smell like a campfire. Eventually, you would simply accept that you were now part of the campfire. This was normal. People lived with it. Humans are remarkably good at adapting to things that would make modern people complain within approximately 11 minutes. The interior of the house would probably be shared with other people. Families lived together. Animals might also be kept inside or close to the living space, particularly during colder months. There were benches along the walls. These could serve as seats during the day and sleeping places at night. There might be chests for possessions. There might be cooking equipment. There might be tools. There might be woven textiles. There might be a few personal objects that mattered enormously to their owners. And there would be dirt, quite a bit of dirt. The floor was generally packed earth. So when you slowly sit up, still trying to understand why your bed feels like a collection of suspiciously organized animal skins, you place your feet on the ground. Cold, very cold. You immediately reconsider your decision to wake up. Unfortunately, someone has already noticed. A woman near the hearth looks over at you. She says something. You nod. This seems safer. She says something else. You nod again. This strategy has served travelers surprisingly well throughout history. She points toward a wooden bowl. You pick it up. She points toward the door. You understand. Breakfast. Good. At least breakfast is universal. Mostly, you step outside, and the cold hits you. This is a kind of cold that makes you suddenly appreciate every invention humanity has ever produced involving insulation. The village is beginning to wake. Smoke rises from several houses. The sky is pale. The ground is wet. A man is carrying wood. Someone is leading animals toward a fenced area. A woman is working with wool. Children are already awake, because apparently children have never respected the concept of sleeping in. You look around. This is not the Viking world of legends. It is a working community. Most people are not warriors. That is one of the first things to remember. The word Viking itself is a little more complicated than the image of an entire population spending their mornings sharpening axes. The Old Norse term Viking was associated with people who went raiding or on overseas expeditions. But the societies we call Viking were made up of farmers, craftspeople, traders, fishermen, sailors, landowners, enslaved people, children, elderly people, and many others. Some went raiding. Many did not. For most people, survival depended on much less glamorous activities. Growing food, keeping animals alive, making clothing, repairing buildings, preserving meat and fish, gathering fuel, maintaining tools, and hoping the weather would behave itself. The weather, unfortunately, did not care about your hopes. If you lived in Scandinavia, farming could be difficult. The growing season was limited. The landscape varied enormously. Some areas were fertile. Others were rocky, forested, mountainous, or simply inconvenient. The sea could provide fish. Animals provided meat, milk, wool, leather, and other useful materials. Grain could be grown where conditions allowed. Barley was particularly important. So were oats. And depending on the region, people might cultivate rye and other crops. But nothing was guaranteed. A bad harvest could create serious problems. This is why food preservation mattered so much. You couldn't simply order dinner. There was no delivery app. There wasn't even a mildly irritated teenager on a bicycle arriving 20 minutes late with your soup. You had a plan. Food had to last through winter. Meat could be dried, smoked, or salted. Fish could be preserved. Dairy products could be processed into forms that lasted longer. Grain could be stored. And every household had to think about the months when the fields stopped producing. Winter was not just a season. It was a logistical problem. And so, as you stand outside your borrowed Viking house, you begin to realize that the most important object in the entire village might not be an axe. It might be the food store. You watch people moving around. Everyone seems to have a job. And everyone seems to know what their job is. Except you. You are currently standing in the middle of the village, looking like a person who has just discovered agriculture for the first time. A small child walks past you. The child stares. You stare back. The child says something. You smile. The child runs away. Apparently, your social reputation has already been established. Not ideal, but survivable. You look toward the shoreline. There may be boats there. And this is where the familiar Viking image begins to make a little more sense. The sea was enormously important. Scandinavia is shaped by water. Coasts, islands, fjords, rivers, and lakes connected communities. Ships allowed people to travel, trade, fish, migrate, explore, and raid. The famous Viking longships were sophisticated vessels. They were light. They were relatively shallow in draft. They could move using both oars and sails. And they could travel surprisingly far. This was one of the reasons Scandinavian seafarers became such influential travelers during the Viking Age. But standing beside one of those ships would probably make you feel less heroic than you expected, because ships require maintenance, which needs attention. Ropes need care. Sails need repair. Food and water have to be carried. Weather has to be watched. And the sea has never been particularly interested in whether you have an exciting soundtrack playing in the background. You might see a ship being prepared, men and women working around it. cargo being loaded, someone checking equipment, someone arguing about something that seems extremely important, someone else probably pretending not to listen, and you begin to understand that this world runs on practical knowledge. People know how to read the weather. They know the landscape. They know animals. They know plants. They know boats. They know which wood is useful for which purpose. They know how to spin wool, how to weave, how to preserve food, how to build, how to repair, how to survive. You, meanwhile, know how to unlock a smartphone, a skill that is not currently helping. Still, there is something strangely peaceful about it. The village is noisy, but not in the modern way. There are no engines, no traffic, no constant electronic buzzing. Instead, there is a sound of footsteps in mud, with striking wood, a hammer against metal, animals making their various opinions known, people talking, the wind moving across the settlement, and the sea, always the sea. You take another look at the village. For a moment, the strangeness begins to fade. You are still thousands of years removed from home. You still have absolutely no idea what happened to you. But the morning is quiet. The fire is warm. The people around you are simply living their lives. They have chores. They have families. They have worries. They have small joys. They have arguments that probably seem extremely important today and will be completely forgotten in a few generations. And that is perhaps the strangest part waking up in the Viking Age. It isn't the weapons. It isn't the ships. It isn't even the language. It is realizing that everyone here thinks their ordinary morning is completely normal. Someone is annoyed because the sheep escaped. Someone is worried about the weather. Someone is trying to repair a broken tool. Someone is making breakfast. Someone is telling a story. Someone is probably complaining about someone else. Because apparently, even after 1,000 years, humanity has remained impressively consistent. You take a slow breath. The cold air enters your lungs. Smoke drifts lazily above the rooftops. The sun climbs a little higher. And somewhere nearby, breakfast is waiting. So you follow the smell. Because whatever century you happen to wake up in, breakfast remains a reasonable place to begin. And tomorrow, if the village is still willing to tolerate you, there will be work. There will be animals. There will be food to prepare. There will be tools to repair. There will be stories to hear. And perhaps, eventually, you will begin to understand what people are saying. For now, though, you simply sit near the fire, warm your hands, listen to the unfamiliar voices around you, and let the Viking morning slowly pass by. No alarms, no notifications, no traffic, just smoke, wood wool, cold air, and the distant sound of the sea, which, honestly, is not the worst way to wake up, even if your mattress is basically a pile of sheep. By now, you have discovered 3 important things about Viking life. First, the houses are smoky. Second, the weather has absolutely no sympathy for you. And third, nobody seems particularly interested in explaining what is happening. You are simply expected to adapt, which, to be fair, is probably how most people in the Viking Age would have approached you. There was no orientation meeting, no little welcome booklet, no friendly local saying, "Hello, traveler from an unknown dimension. Here is your schedule for the week." You were alive. You were apparently healthy. You had 2 hands. That was probably enough. So you sit near the hearth and wait for breakfast. The fire crackles softly. Someone is stirring a pot. A wooden spoon moves slowly through something thick and warm. You lean forward. Finally, food. The smell is not unpleasant. It is earthy, smoky, simple. Perhaps some kind of porridge made from grain. Barley or oats would have been common staples in many Scandinavian communities. There might be milk. There might be leftover fish. There might be bread if the household has enough grain and the time to make it. There might be cheese or other dairy products. It depends on where you are, what season it is, and how prosperous the household happens to be. This is something that will become increasingly obvious during your imaginary Viking morning. There is no single Viking diet. There is no universal Viking breakfast. There is simply whatever the household managed to grow, raise, catch, preserve, trade for, or store. You are handed a bowl. You stare at it. The person who gave it to you stares back. You eat. It is warm. That alone makes it excellent. You take another spoonful. The texture is thick. The flavor is mild. There's probably some salt, perhaps a little dairy, maybe berries or other additions depending on the season. It is not exactly the sort of breakfast you would photograph for social media. But then again, there is no social media, so perhaps it wins. You eat slowly. Around you, everyone else is already moving. This is your first real lesson. The day does not wait for you. The sun is up. The animals need attention. The fire needs tending. Water needs collecting. Food needs preparing. Tools need repairing. Clothing needs making. And all of these things take time, a surprising amount of time. Modern life hides an enormous amount of labor. You turn on a tap, water appears. You turn a knob, heat appears. You open a refrigerator, food appears. You switch on a light, the room becomes bright. In a Viking settlement, every one of these conveniences would be replaced by a task. Water comes from somewhere. Wood has to be gathered. Food has to be prepared. Light comes from fire or lamps. Clothes have to be made. Buildings have to be maintained. And if something breaks, there is no customer service department. You are the customer service department. So after breakfast, you are sent outside. At least that is what you assume. The same broad-shouldered man from earlier points toward a stack of wood, then toward you, then toward the wood again. You consider pretending not to understand. But this is probably not the right time to begin your career as a Viking rebel. So you walk over. The wood is heavier than it looks. You pick up one piece. It is manageable. You pick up another. Less manageable. You carry them toward the house. Someone nods approvingly. Excellent. You have now become useful. This is how many days in a farming community would begin, not with heroic speeches, with firewood. The importance of fuel is easy to underestimate. In a cold climate, fuel means warmth. Warmth means survival. It also means cooking. So collecting and processing wood is not some minor chore. It is part of the foundation of daily life. Branches must be gathered. Larger pieces must be cut. Wood must be dried. It must be stored. And somehow, there must always be enough. You carry another bundle. Your arms are already beginning to complain. The Viking Age is becoming less glamorous by the minute. Nearby, a woman is working with wool. She pulls fibers apart, spins them, works carefully. The process is slow, very slow. You watch for a while. This is another part of Viking life that modern imagination often skips. Clothing does not simply exist. Someone makes it. Textiles were valuable. Wool was particularly important. She provided wool, meat, milk, and hides. Wool could be spun into yarn. Yarn could be woven into cloth. Cloth could become tunics, dresses, cloaks, trousers, blankets, sails, and other useful things. Linen was also used, particularly where flax could be cultivated. The clothing of a Viking Age person depended on wealth, region, occupation, and circumstances. And while popular images often give everyone the same brown leather outfit, real clothing was considerably more varied. People could wear dyed textiles. Colors might include reds, blues, yellows, greens, and other shades depending on available dyes and materials. Some people could afford better quality fabrics. Others had to make do with simpler garments. The wealthy could display their status through clothing, jewelry, imported materials, and other possessions. The poor had fewer options. And that difference mattered. Because Viking society was not an equal little community where everyone shared everything and walked around looking rugged. There were social divisions. There were wealthy landowners. There were free farmers. There were craftsmen and traders. There were servants. And there were enslaved people. Slavery was an important and deeply unpleasant part of Viking Age societies. People could be captured during raids or warfare. They could be bought and sold. They could be transported over long distances. Some became domestic workers. Others performed agricultural labor or other forms of work. The word Viking sometimes creates a romantic image of adventurous freedom, but freedom was not equally available to everyone. For some people, this world offered independence and opportunity. For others, it offered very little control over their own lives. That contrast is important, and it makes the ordinary village seem more complicated. The person weaving cloth may be free. The person carrying out another chore may not be. The wealthy household may own land and livestock. Another household may owe obligations to someone more powerful. The village may appear peaceful. But beneath the peaceful morning, society is structured by status, family, wealth, obligation, and reputation. And reputation matters enormously. You begin to notice that people pay attention to one another. Who owns what? Who is related to whom? Who has married whom? Who owes whom a favor? Who insulted whom last winter? Who has the best horse? Who has the largest farm? Who has returned from a successful trading journey? Who has lost livestock? Who is trustworthy? Who is not? These things are remembered. Oral societies can have surprisingly long memories. Stories travel. Rumors travel faster. And if you embarrass yourself publicly, there's a reasonable chance someone will still be talking about it years later. So perhaps be careful before challenging anyone to a Viking duel because you have watched too many television shows. You are beginning to understand that the village is held together by relationships. Family is especially important. Most people live surrounded by relatives. Parents, children, siblings, cousins, in-laws, distant relations who somehow still know exactly who your grandfather was. Households can be complicated. Marriage is not simply about romance. It can involve property, alliances, family interests, and social status. For wealthy families, marriage could be an important political and economic arrangement. Love may exist. Of course, people were still people. They fell in love. They became jealous. They argued. They missed one another. They made terrible decisions. They changed their minds. But marriage also existed within a social system where families mattered enormously. You watch a couple speaking near the doorway. You cannot understand the words, but you can understand the expression. The man looks irritated. The woman looks even more irritated. You do not know what the argument is about, but you have a feeling that it has nothing to do with you. This is comforting. Some things apparently survive every century. You return to your wood. The stack is getting smaller. Your arms hurt. You begin to wonder whether you have made a terrible mistake. Then you notice the village blacksmith. This is much more interesting. The blacksmith works near a forge. The fire glows. Tools lie nearby. Metal is heated, hammered, shaped. The rhythm is steady. Bang, pause, bang, pause, bang. It is almost hypnotic. And blacksmiths were extremely useful people. Metalworking required skill. Iron tools could transform everyday work. Knives, axes, hammers, nails, fittings, agricultural tools, weapons. Everything had to be made, repaired, sharpened, or replaced. A good smith could be valuable to a community. And metal was not simply something you picked up at the village hardware store. Iron had to be produced from ore in some Scandinavian regions. Iron was made from bog ore. The ore could be collected, processed, and smelted. The process required fuel, knowledge, equipment, and patience. Again, nothing simply appeared. Every object had a history. Every tool represented someone's labor. A wooden spoon was not just a spoon. Someone shaped the wood. A wool cloak was not just clothing. Someone raised sheep. Someone gathered wool. Someone spun it. Someone wove it. Someone dyed it. Someone stitched it. A knife was not just a knife. Someone mined or collected the raw material. Someone smelted metal. Someone forged it. Someone sharpened it. And someone eventually used it to cut dinner. You look down at your own hands. You begin to realize how much work is hidden inside ordinary life. Then you notice another problem. Your clothes. They are not exactly suitable. The cold has already found its way through them. The people around you seem prepared. Layers of wool, tunic-like garments, cloaks, footwear made from leather. Some people might have additional protective clothing, depending on the season. You, meanwhile, are dressed like someone who expected central heating. Not ideal. Someone gives you a wool garment. You put it on. It is rough. It is warm. You immediately decide that wool is one of humanity's better inventions. You sit down again. The sun is higher now. The village is fully awake. The morning has become busy, but there is no sense of frantic rushing. There is simply work. One task follows another. The rhythm of the day is determined by daylight. weather, animals, seasons, and necessity. This is perhaps the closest thing to a Viking routine. Wake, tend the fire, eat, work, eat again, work some more, repair things, prepare food, care for animals, socialize, tell stories, sleep, and repeat. The details change with the seasons. Summer brings longer days and more agricultural work. Winter brings darkness, cold, indoor labor, storytelling, and careful management of stored food. The difference between summer and winter could be enormous. In summer, the sun might remain above the horizon for very long periods in northern regions. In winter, darkness could dominate the day, so people had to adapt their routines. They could not simply assume every day would be equally productive. Nature controlled the schedule, and nature was not interested in convenience. You look toward the sea again. Perhaps later, someone will take you down there. Perhaps you will see the boats more closely. Perhaps you will learn what these people trade. Perhaps you will hear stories about distant places. But for now, you have another task. Someone points toward a bucket, then toward the well. You stare at the bucket, then at the well, then back at the person. They nod. You sigh quietly. Of course. Water. You pick it up and begin walking. The bucket swings slightly in your hand. Your feet sink into the damp ground. The air is cold. The smoke from the houses drifts across the settlement. A dog follows you for a few steps, then loses interest. The village continues around you. People working, children playing, animals moving, smoke rising, the sea beyond everything. And for the first time, you begin to stop thinking about getting back home. Not completely, but just for a moment, because this place is strange. It is uncomfortable. It is cold. It is smoky. It is labor-intensive. And yet it is alive. People here know what they're doing. They have built a life from wood, wool, iron, soil animals, and water. They have no idea that centuries later, strangers will look back at them and turn them into legends. To the people here, they are simply people. They have bills to pay, although not quite in the modern sense. They have food to preserve, children to raise, animals to feed, tools to repair, neighbors to tolerate, and winters to survive. You reach the water. You lower the bucket. For a moment, everything becomes quiet. You can hear the rope, the distant sea, the wind, a bird somewhere overhead. You pull the bucket back up. It is heavy. Naturally, you carry it toward the village. And as you walk, you begin to understand something. If you really had woken up in a Viking village, the hardest part would not necessarily be the danger. It would be the ordinary things, the endless little tasks, the cold, the smoke, the heavy work, the lack of privacy, the uncertainty of harvests, the need to make almost everything yourself, and the fact that if your shoe broke, you could not simply buy another pair tomorrow. You would have to repair it, or find someone who could, or make another one. Life was not constantly dramatic. That is the important part. Most of it was ordinary, quiet, repetitive, sometimes boring, sometimes satisfying, sometimes exhausting, and occasionally probably very funny, although we have lost most of those jokes to time. You bring the water back. Someone takes the bucket from you. They say something. You still don't understand. But this time, you think you recognize the tone. Approval. Maybe. You smile. They smile back. And somehow, without knowing a single word of the language, you have completed your first morning in the Viking Age. Not as a warrior. Not as a raider. Not as a legendary hero. Just as the person who carried the water. Which, honestly, is probably the most historically accurate Viking experience you could have asked for. For now, sit near the fire. Warm yourself. Listen to the quiet movement of the settlement. There is still an entire day ahead. And somewhere beyond the village, the sea is waiting. But you have time. For once, nobody is asking you to check your messages. Nobody is waiting for an email. Nobody needs a password reset. There's only the fire, the wool, the wooden walls, the soft sounds of ordinary life, and the slow rhythm of a world that moves at the speed of human hands. Be why late morning. You have completed enough chores to earn what might generously be described as a temporary place in the community. You have carried wood. You have carried water. You have eaten breakfast without accidentally offending anyone. And, most importantly, nobody has thrown you out. So far, things are going surprisingly well. You are beginning to understand that surviving in a Viking village is less about being brave and more about being useful. This is not entirely different from modern life. Although in the modern world, being useful might mean knowing how to operate a spreadsheet. Here, being useful means knowing which animal has escaped. And apparently one has. A young boy comes running across the settlement. He points toward a field, then toward you. You have learned enough by now to recognize that this is probably another assignment. You follow him. The field is uneven. There are patches of grass. Some areas are muddy. The soil is not particularly impressive. But this is farmland, and farmland is precious. You can see people working nearby. Someone is clearing stones. Someone is repairing a fence. Someone is checking crops. And they're wandering peacefully through all this effort. Is the problem? A sheep. It is standing outside the enclosure. It looks at you. You look at it. The sheep appears completely satisfied with its life. You begin walking toward it. The sheep walks away. You stop. The sheep stops. You take another step. The sheep takes another step. This continues for several seconds. You are now negotiating with the sheep. The sheep appears to have the stronger position. Eventually, the boy grabs it. The sheep protests. You are beginning to understand that animals were not simply background scenery in Viking life. They were essential. Cattle provided milk, meat, hides, and labor. Sheep provided wool, meat, milk, and skins. Goats would provide milk and meat. Pigs were useful for meat. Horses were important for transportation and status. Dogs helped with herding, hunting, guarding, and companionship. Chickens and other birds could provide eggs and meat. Every animal represented resources, but animals also required work. They had to be fed, protected, moved, milked, bred, watched, and occasionally chased around a field by a confused traveler from the future. Livestock could be one of the most important forms of wealth. In a world without modern banking, a healthy herd represented real value. If you owned cattle, sheep, horses, or pigs, you owned something that could reproduce, provide food, produce materials, and be exchanged. So losing an animal was not a minor inconvenience. It could be a financial problem. And this is why fences mattered. Although fencing could take many forms, keeping animals where they were supposed to be was an ongoing challenge. Animals, like modern people, did not always respect boundaries. The sheep finally returns to the enclosure. You watch it disappear among the others. The boy looks pleased. You have helped. Another successful Viking mission. You are becoming a local legend. A very boring local legend, but a legend nonetheless. You walk farther into the farming area. The fields are divided into plots. The exact agricultural system varies by place and period, but crops were essential to survival. Grain was particularly important. Barley could be used for food and brewing. Oats could also be cultivated. In some regions, rye and other crops were grown. Vegetables and legumes could contribute to the diet. Flax could be grown for linen. The farm was not simply a field where food magically appeared. It required constant attention. Plowing, sowing, weeding, harvesting, threshing, drying, storing. Each stage had its own problems. If you planted too early, weather could damage the crop. Too late, and the growing season might not be long enough. Too much rain could cause problems. Too little rain could cause even more. Pests could destroy crops. Animals could wander into them. And then there was winter. Winter was always somewhere in the background. Even during a pleasant summer day, people had to think about the months ahead. That meant storing food, preserving meat, protecting grain, keeping animals healthy, gathering enough fuel, repairing buildings before snow and storms arrived. Summer was not simply a season of leisure. It was a season when you worked so that winter would be less unpleasant. This is one reason Viking Age society was so dependent on cooperation. A household might be capable of doing many things, but no household could easily do everything. People traded. They exchanged goods. They borrowed. They cooperated. They married into other families. They relied on neighbors. They relied on specialists. The blacksmith needed farmers. Farmers needed blacksmiths. Shipbuilders needed timber. Traders needed producers. Everyone needed food. Everyone needed clothing. Everyone needed firewood. And eventually, everyone needed to sleep. You walk toward the edge of the settlement. There's a small patch of cultivated land. Nearby, someone is working with a hand tool. You watch. The movements are repetitive, steady, almost meditative. Dig, lift, turn, smooth, repeat. There is something strangely calming about it. No machine is doing the work. No engine is running. No timer is counting down. There's only the person, the soil, and the tool. The work is slow, but the rhythm is predictable. You can almost imagine falling asleep while watching it. Perhaps that is one of the reasons repetitive work appears in so many traditional societies. It creates a rhythm, and rhythms can be comforting, especially when the world around you is uncertain. You sit on a low wooden surface. A woman nearby is preparing something, perhaps food, perhaps plant material, perhaps another task you do not yet recognize. She looks at you, then at the field, then at you again. You decide she is silently asking whether you intend to sit there all day. You stand. Apparently, the Viking Age has no unemployment benefits. There is always something to do. You are directed toward another task. This time, it involves helping with hay. Hay was important for livestock. During the warmer months, grass could be cut and dried. The dried material could then be stored and used as animal feed during winter. This sounds simple. It is not. Cutting grass by hand is labor. Drying it properly requires good weather. Rain can ruin carefully prepared hay, and if you do not have enough stored, your animals may suffer during winter. So the sunny days matter. Every clear day matters. You spread the cut grass. The smell is surprisingly pleasant. Fresh, green, earthy. The breeze moves through the field. For a moment, the village feels almost peaceful. You look toward the hills. Beyond them, forests stretch into the distance. The landscape is enormous. There are no roads in the modern sense, no telephone poles, no concrete buildings, no distant skyline, just land, trees, water, and small communities connected by paths and waterways. You begin to appreciate how different distance must have felt. Today, a place 100 kilometers away might be a short drive. For a Viking Age farmer, the same distance could mean a long journey. Travel required planning. You needed food, water, clothing, perhaps a boat, perhaps animals, perhaps companions. Weather could slow you down. Rivers had to be crossed. Forests had to be navigated. Mountains could block routes. The sea could become dangerous. This meant people often lived within a much smaller practical world. But that did not mean they were unaware of the larger world. Quite the opposite. Viking Age Scandinavians were connected to extensive trade networks. Goods traveled enormous distances. Silver from the Islamic world could reach Scandinavia. Silks and luxury goods came from far away. Amber traveled. Furs traveled. Iron traveled. Walrus ivory could travel from the far north. People traveled too. Some went west toward Britain and Ireland. Others went east through the Baltic and along the river systems of Eastern Europe. Some reached the Byzantine Empire. Others reached the lands of the Islamic world. And some sailed across the North Atlantic. But back here in the village, most people still had fields to tend. That is the interesting contradiction. A world can be interconnected without everyone traveling. You could live your entire life in one region and still benefit indirectly from objects that had crossed half a continent. Perhaps someone in your village owns a piece of imported jewelry. Perhaps a merchant has brought silver coins. Perhaps someone has seen a strange foreign cloth. Perhaps a traveler has returned with stories about cities so large that they seem impossible. These objects and stories would give people glimpses of a wider world. But the everyday routine remained local. The sheep still needed feeding. The roof still needed repair. The field still needed harvesting. You watch a farmer inspect a fence. He notices a weak section. He crouches, touches a wood, shakes his head. There's another repair job. You almost laugh. The Viking Age you're discovering is basically one long series of maintenance problems. And this is especially true of the houses. Wooden buildings need constant attention. Rain, wind, snow, animals, moisture, time. Everything works against a wooden structure. Walls need repair. Roofs need maintenance. Doors need fixing. Fences collapse. Tools break. Clothing tears. Shoes wear out. Nothing stays perfect. This creates a culture of repair. People use things until they are no longer useful. Then they reuse parts. Wood can be reshaped. Metal can be reforged. Cloth can be patched. Leather can be repaired. Nothing is casually thrown away. Resources are too valuable. You begin to think about your own modern home. If something breaks, you often replace it. Here, replacement is not always easy. You repair. You improvise. You adapt. And this requires knowledge. Much of that knowledge is passed down through families and communities. Children learn by watching adults. They learn how to handle animals, how to work with tools, how to spin, how to weave, how to fish, how to build, how to cook, how to navigate, how to behave. There is no formal school system teaching everyone the same curriculum. Instead, education is woven into everyday life. A child watches, then helps, then tries, then makes mistakes, then tries again, and eventually becomes the person teaching someone else. You see children nearby. They are not sitting quietly. They are running, playing, fighting over something, laughing, learning. Childhood was not simply miniature adulthood, but children were certainly expected to become useful members of the household. Their responsibilities would increase as they grew older. The games they played may have helped them develop physical skills. Running, climbing, throwing, balancing, imitating adults, learning social rules, and occasionally probably doing something extremely foolish. Because children have apparently been doing that since the beginning of time. You walk back toward the main settlement. The smell of cooking is stronger now. It is approaching midday. People are gathering. The rhythm changes slightly. Work pauses. Food becomes important again. You are starting to understand the day through these repeated cycles. Work, rest, food, work, conversation, fire, sleep. There is something comforting about repetition. You know what comes next. You may not know exactly what tomorrow brings, but today has a shape, and that shape is dictated by the needs of the community. You sit near the fire. Someone gives you food. This time, you recognize it. Bread, perhaps coarse, perhaps dense, but bread. You eat slowly. Outside, the village continues. The sheep have been successfully contained. For now, the blacksmith's hammer continues its steady rhythm. Children run past. A dog curls up near a doorway. Someone laughs. Someone calls to someone else. The wind moves through the grass, and the sea remains in the distance. You take another bite. You are still an outsider, but perhaps slightly less of one. You have learned where the water is. You know where the firewood is kept. You know that the sheep cannot be trusted. You know that wool is wonderful. And you have discovered that Viking life is not one continuous adventure. It is mostly work. Quiet work. Necessary work. Sometimes pleasant work. Sometimes exhausting work. And occasionally, sheep-related work. You lean back. The warmth of the fire reaches your hands. Your eyelids feel heavy. The repetitive sounds of the village blend together. Hammer, wind, footsteps, animals, voices, fire. It is almost like a natural lullaby. And as you listen, you begin to imagine what it would have felt like to spend your entire life here. To know these fields, these trees, these houses, this shoreline. To recognize every path, every family, every animal, every season. The world would feel smaller, but perhaps not necessarily emptier. There would still be stories. There would still be friendships. There would still be arguments. There would still be weddings, births, deaths, feasts, markets, travelers, news from distant lands. And, of course, someone somewhere would still be complaining about his sheep. The afternoon is approaching. There is more work to do, but for a few quiet minutes, you simply sit. The fire crackles. The wooden walls hold the warmth. The village breathes around you. And beyond it all, the northern landscape stretches quietly toward the horizon. For now, you are safe, warm enough, fed, and slowly becoming accustomed to a world where nothing is automatic. A world where every meal has a story, every garment has a maker, every tool has a purpose, and every sheep has apparently been given a personal mission to escape. You close your eyes for just a moment, only a moment, because there is still an entire Viking afternoon ahead. And when you open them again, someone is already standing nearby, pointing toward the shoreline. Apparently, there is something you are supposed to see. Of course there is. The person pointing toward the shoreline is waiting patiently. You look at the sea, then at him, then back at the sea. He points again. Fine. Apparently, this is your afternoon activity. You follow him down toward the water. The path is uneven. Your borrowed shoes are not particularly comfortable. And after spending the morning carrying wood, water, hay, and apparently your entire new existence from one place to another, your legs are beginning to feel slightly offended. But the shoreline is beautiful. The water stretches out beneath the pale sky. Small waves move gently against the coast. A few boats are pulled onto the shore. Others are floating farther out. The smell of salt water mixes with smoke from the village. Gulls circle overhead. And there, resting above the water, is a thing that has probably shaped your entire image of the Viking Age. A ship, not the enormous fantasy ship from a modern movie. Not a vessel with decorative horns everywhere. Just a long, narrow wooden boat. And somehow, it looks both delicate and incredibly practical. The first thing you notice is its shape. Long, low, graceful. The hull is designed to move efficiently through the water. Many Viking Age ships use clinker construction, where overlapping wooden planks form the hull. This technique produced strong yet relatively light vessels. The ships could use both sails and oars. That combination was incredibly useful. With favorable wind, a sail could carry the ship. Without wind, rowers could provide movement. And because the ships were relatively shallow in draft, they could approach beaches and travel through shallow waters. That mattered enormously. A ship did not always need a deep harbor. It could simply come onto the shore, which meant that suddenly a coastline became a road. The sea was no longer just an obstacle. It was a route, a very large route. You walk closer. Someone is working on the hull, a section of it needs attention. Naturally, because apparently the Viking Age has decided that everything you see must be repaired. You run your hand along the timber, smooth in some places, rough in others. You can see the craftsmanship. Woodworking was an advanced skill. Trees had to be selected carefully. Timber had to be shaped. Planks had to be fitted. Joints had to be secured. The whole structure needed to remain flexible enough to move with the waves, while still being strong enough to survive the sea. This was not a weekend project. Building a ship required knowledge accumulated over generations. A skilled shipbuilder understood wood, grain, moisture, shape, weight, balance, and the behavior of the vessel in water. You watch one of the workers inspect a plank. He taps it, looks at it, touches the edge, then nods. You have no idea what he has just decided, but apparently it is important. This is the strange thing about entering another historical world. Everyone around you is an expert in things you barely understand. The farmer understands soil. The sailor understands currents. The blacksmith understands metal. The weaver understands fiber. The carpenter understands timber. The fisherman understands the sea. You know how to use a search engine. Unfortunately, there is no search engine here. You are helpless. You walk toward the boat. The man gestures for you to step inside. You do. The boat moves slightly. You immediately freeze. The man laughs. Not loudly. Just enough. Apparently, he has seen this before. You slowly sit down. The wooden hull is narrow. There is not much room. You look around. This is where the romantic Viking adventure begins to lose some of its charm. Imagine spending days on this. No private cabin. No comfortable bathroom. No refrigerator. No entertainment system. No bed. No climate control. You would be surrounded by other people. And the sea. And more sea. And occasionally some food. And probably a lot of damp clothing. Long-distance travel was difficult, even with an excellent ship. The sea is unpredictable. Waves can rise. Wind can change. Fog can appear. Rain can soak everything. Cold can become dangerous. Navigation required knowledge of the environment. Sailors could use the position of the sun and stars. They could observe coastlines. They could recognize islands and landmarks. They could understand prevailing winds and currents. Bird behavior might also provide clues about nearby land. There are many myths about Viking navigation involving a mysterious sunstone. The idea is fascinating, and Iceland's spar may indeed have had optical properties useful in determining the sun's position under certain conditions. But we should be careful about turning that into a certainty that every Viking sailor casually pulled a magical crystal from his pocket whenever the weather became inconvenient. Historical reality is usually less cinematic. These sailors were experienced. They knew the sea, and experience is often more useful than a magical object. You sit quietly. The ship rocks. The movement is gentle. For a moment, it is strangely peaceful. Then the boat shifts again. Your stomach shifts with it. You decide that perhaps you are better suited to farming. The man beside you seems perfectly comfortable. He is checking the rigging. He pulls a rope, examines a knot, checks something near the mast. The sail is furled. The ship is not going anywhere today. That is probably good, because you have not yet mastered the advanced Viking skill of not falling into the ocean. You step back onto the shore. The ground feels wonderfully stable. You appreciate land in a new way. The sea remains beautiful, but beautiful things can still be inconvenient. A little farther along the shore, you see people preparing fish. This is another important part of life. Fishing could provide a major source of food. Depending on location and season, people could catch cod, herring, salmon, and many other species. Fish could be eaten fresh. But preservation was critical. Drying and salting allowed fish to be stored and transported. In northern regions, dried fish could become an important commodity. The process might seem simple. Catch fish, clean them, prepare them, dry them, store them. But again, weather matters. Moisture matters. Temperature matters. Salt is valuable. And spoilage is always waiting. Food preservation was a quiet form of survival. It meant that the work done today could keep people alive months later. You watch the fish being prepared. The movements are practiced. No one wastes much. Everything has a use. The bones, the flesh, the skin, whatever can be preserved or repurposed may be kept. You begin to understand how different attitudes toward resources could be. When something takes hours to produce, you do not casually throw it away. A piece of cloth represents labor. A wooden bowl represents labor. A metal knife represents labor. A loaf of bread represents labor. Food is labor. Fuel is labor. Warmth is labor. Even clean water is labor. This makes modern convenience seem almost magical. You turn on a tap. Water. You open a cupboard. Food. You flip a switch. Light. You order something online. It arrives. The Viking world has none of this. And yet, people managed. They developed systems. They built communities. They traded. They learned. They adapted. You walk along the shoreline. There are traces of activity everywhere. Wooden posts, ropes, fishing equipment, tools, boats, people coming and going. This place is not isolated. The village may be small, but the sea connects it to other places. Perhaps traders will arrive from another settlement. Perhaps someone will leave tomorrow. Perhaps a ship has recently returned from a long journey. And whenever travelers return, they bring more than goods. They bring news. This is something that is easy to forget. Before newspapers, radio, television, and the internet, information traveled with people. A traveler might tell stories about another community. A merchant might report changes in prices. A sailor might bring news of a king. Someone might describe a battle. Someone else might mention a marriage. A traveler might exaggerate. Another person might exaggerate even more. By the time the story reached the next settlement, it could be almost unrecognizable. Humanity had invented social media. It just moved at walking speed. You imagine someone arriving at a Viking hall and saying, "I heard the king has a new horse." and someone else responds, "No, I heard the king has 3 new horses." And 3 weeks later, the story becomes, "The king has become a horse." You smile to yourself. Probably not historically documented, but entirely believable as a general human tendency. The Viking Age was an age of stories. Oral storytelling was important. People remembered genealogies, legends, poems, family histories, feats of ancestors, feuds, marriages, travels, and eventually, many stories were written down in medieval Icelandic manuscripts. But during the Viking Age itself, much knowledge was transmitted orally. This required memory, strong memory. A person could know their family history several generations back. A poet could memorize complicated verses. A storyteller could hold an audience with nothing but words. And in the evenings, inside the longhouse, those stories would become part of entertainment. There were no streaming services, no movies, no television, no podcasts. Although, if you think about it, a skilled storyteller sitting beside a fire is basically a very old podcast. The difference is that nobody can pause him. You continue along the shore. The afternoon light is changing. The village behind you looks smaller now. You can see smoke rising from the houses. Fields spread beyond them. Animals move through the grass. The whole settlement sits between land and water. This location is not accidental. Access to the sea can mean access to food, transport, trade, communication, opportunity. But it also means exposure. Storms, pirates, raiders, enemies. The same sea that brings wealth can bring danger. And this is where the Viking world becomes more complicated. The people you see farming and fishing are part of a wider society that could also produce warriors and raiders. Some men and women left their homes for overseas expeditions. Some returned wealthy. Some never returned. Some settled abroad. Some traded peacefully. Some participated in violence. The same ship could carry merchants one season and raiders another. History does not always fit neatly into categories. A sailor might be a trader in one context, a warrior in another, a farmer at home, a husband, a father, a son, a neighbor. The word Viking can make people imagine a permanent occupation. But for many it was something they did, not necessarily who they were all the time. You look at the ship again. It seems smaller now, less like a legendary machine of conquest, more like a very complicated piece of equipment. A vessel made by people who understood their environment extremely well. You begin to wonder what it would feel like to sail on it, not for an hour, but for days, weeks, perhaps across the North Atlantic. The thought is both fascinating and uncomfortable. The horizon would be enormous. The sea would surround you. The wind would decide your speed. Your clothing might stay damp. Food would be limited. Fresh water would have to be carefully managed. Sleep would be difficult. And there would be nowhere to simply step off and stretch your legs. Perhaps you would quickly develop a deep appreciation for dry land. You sit on the shore. The sun is getting lower. Someone nearby is repairing a fishing net. The movement is repetitive. Pull, loop, tighten, repeat. The sound of water is gentle. A gull calls. The wind passes over grass. You feel your thoughts slowing down. It is strange. You came here imagining Viking life would be loud. Axes, war cries, ships, battles. Instead, most of what you have experienced is quiet. Wood being cut, wool being spun, food being prepared, animals being fed, nets being repaired, boats being maintained, people talking. The Great Viking Age, from the perspective of one ordinary afternoon, is mostly maintenance. And perhaps that makes it more interesting, because history is not only made by dramatic moments. It is also made by people waking up every morning and doing the same small things that keep a community alive. Someone grows the food. Someone makes the clothes. Someone fixes the roof. Someone builds a boat. Someone catches the fish. Someone tells the stories. And someone, somewhere, keeps losing sheep. You look toward the village. It is time to return. The man who brought you here gestures toward the path. You stand. Your legs are stiff. You have discovered another truth about historical transportation. Walking is tiring, especially after carrying water. You begin the journey back. The village slowly gets closer. Smoke rises into the evening air. The sound becomes clearer. Children are disappearing indoors. Animals are being settled. People are preparing the evening meal. The day is winding down. And for the first time, you recognize a feeling. Not home, not yet, but routine. You know where the fire is. You know where the food is. You know where the animals are. You know the path to the water. You know the shoreline. And you know one very important thing. If you see that sheep outside the fence again, you are pretending you did not notice. You reach the longhouse. Warmth spills through the doorway. Inside, the fire is glowing. The air is smoky. People are gathering. Someone is talking. Someone is preparing food. Someone is laughing softly. You sit down. Your body is tired. The day has been long, but there is something peaceful about it. No clocks. No schedules divided into 15-minute meetings. No endless notifications. Only the natural rhythm of the day. Light, work, food, darkness, rest. You lean back. The fire moves quietly. Outside, the sea continues to breathe against the shore. And somewhere beyond the darkness, other settlements are doing the same thing. Other families are eating. Other sailors are repairing boats. Other farmers are checking animals. Other storytellers are beginning their evening tales. The Viking world is enormous. But tonight, you only need this one small room, this one fire, this one quiet evening. And perhaps, for a little while, that is enough to be why the time you return to the longhouse, the light outside has begun to soften. The village is quieter now, not silent. A village is rarely silent. There are still animals moving around. Someone is carrying a final bundle of wood. A child is being told, in a tone that requires no translation, that it is time to come inside. A dog is barking at something that probably does not deserve the attention. And somewhere near the shore, the sea continues its slow movement against the land. But the busy feeling of the day is fading. The longhouse is warm, or at least warmer than outside. You step through the doorway. The smoke is still there. You have now spent enough time around the hearth to realize that the smoke is simply part of the furniture. It lives here. It has probably lived here longer than you have. You sit near the fire. Someone places a bowl in front of you. Dinner. And this is where the Viking day begins to feel different. During daylight, the community is spread across fields, shorelines, workshops, animal enclosures, and paths. At night, people gather. The longhouse becomes the center of attention. The hearth provides warmth and light. People eat, talk, work, repair clothing, prepare tools, tell stories, and eventually sleep. The evening meal might include whatever the household has available: stew, porridge, bread, fish, meat, vegetables, dairy products, perhaps berries or other seasonal foods. The exact meal depends on geography, season, wealth, and luck. There's no Viking restaurant menu. You eat what exists. You take a spoonful. Warm, simple, filling. After a full day of work, it tastes better than it probably would have in the morning. That is another thing about pre-modern life. Hunger changes your standards. A thick bowl of grain suddenly becomes magnificent when you have spent the afternoon moving hay. You eat quietly. Around you, conversation grows. You cannot understand most of it, but you are beginning to recognize patterns. Someone is telling a story. Someone else interrupts. A person near the wall laughs. Another person shakes their head. The storyteller continues. You watch the expressions. This is one of the great things about human communication. Even without language, you can often recognize when someone is exaggerating. And this storyteller is definitely exaggerating. His hands move dramatically. His face becomes serious. Then amused. Then serious again. People around him react. You lean forward. You want to understand. You do not, but you listen anyway. The stories of Viking Age societies were important. People remembered ancestors, heroes, kings, battles, journeys, family relationships, feuds, myths, the gods. The world itself was understood through stories. And storytelling was not simply entertainment. It was a way of preserving knowledge. A genealogy could tell people where they came from. A story about an ancestor could teach expectations about honor or courage. A tale about a foolish person could provide a warning. A myth could explain the world. And, naturally, some stories could simply be entertaining. People have always enjoyed a good story, even when the audience is sitting in a smoky wooden building and the entertainment budget is exactly zero. You listen. The storyteller continues. He mentions a name. Several people react. Perhaps the person is famous. Perhaps the story concerns an ancestor. Perhaps it is an old legend. You will never know, but you notice something. Everyone here seems to know who he is talking about. The village has a memory. That memory is carried by people. There are no archives sitting in a public library. There is no search bar. If you want to know something, you ask someone, and that person tells you what they remember. This creates an interesting relationship with the past. Your ancestors are not distant names in a textbook. They are part of living family stories. People might know the names of grandparents and great-grandparents. They might know where their family came from. They might know which families they are connected to. They might remember old disputes. They might remember marriages. They might remember who once owned a particular farm. In some societies, ancestry could be deeply connected to status. If you came from an important family, people knew. If you were connected to a powerful chieftain, people knew. If your family had a long history in the region, people knew. And if your family had a terrible reputation, people probably knew that too. Again, some things have not changed. The difference is that in a Viking village, there is no possibility of moving to another city and quietly starting over. Your reputation travels with you. You sit near the fire. Someone hands you a cup. It might contain water, milk, or perhaps an alcoholic drink, such as ale. Ale was common in many Viking Age communities. Beer making was an important household activity. Honey could also be used to make mead, though it would have been a more resource-intensive drink because honey was valuable. You take a cautious sip. Whatever it is, you decide that modern beverages have their advantages. The people around you are relaxing. Some are still working. A woman is repairing cloth. Someone is checking a tool. A man is working with a small piece of wood. Another person is untangling something. The evening is not wasted. There is always another task. This makes sense. Daylight is valuable. But darkness does not mean work completely stops. Fire provides light. Oil lamps can also be used. In northern regions, winter darkness can make indoor life especially important. This is when textile work, woodworking, storytelling, and social activities become central. You begin to realize that winter must feel completely different from summer. During summer, the village would have long stretches of daylight. People could work outside for many hours. Fields needed attention. Hay had to be gathered. Animals had to be managed. Food had to be preserved. During winter, many outdoor activities become harder. Snow, cold, short days, limited food. The household becomes more important. People spend more time indoors. And perhaps, after months of outdoor work, the longhouse becomes a comforting place. Warm, crowded, smoky, loud, but alive. You look around. There are no separate bedrooms in the modern sense. Privacy is limited. A large household might sleep in the same general space. Benches along the walls could serve as sleeping platforms. People might use bedding made from wool, linen, animal skins, or other materials. The sleeping arrangement could depend on household structure and status. You look at the bench. That is your bed. You stare at it. The bench stares back. You lie down. It is hard. You shift. Still hard. You shift again. Still hard. Apparently, the Viking Age has strong opinions about mattress technology. You arrange the bedding. The wool helps. The animal skin helps more. You pull the blanket over yourself. Warmth slowly returns. You listen to the people around you. The fire crackles. The voices become softer. Someone tells another story. A child is whispering. Someone coughs. A dog shifts nearby. The longhouse smells of smoke, wool, food, people, leather, and animals. It is not luxurious. but it is familiar to the people living here. And that is something worth remembering. Comfort is relative. If you were born into this world, you would not compare your bed to a modern memory foam mattress. You would compare it to other beds. You would know what normal feels like. Humans adapt. We are very good at adapting. A modern person might think sleeping beside several other people sounds unbearable. A Viking Age person might think sleeping alone in a silent room sounds strange. The idea of normal depends on what you have known. You close your eyes, but you are not asleep yet. There is still conversation. And then you hear something interesting. The storyteller has begun talking about the gods. You recognize one name, Odin. Even from your modern knowledge, you know that name. Odin was associated with wisdom, knowledge, poetry, magic, war, and death. He was one of the most important figures in Norse mythology. You hear another name, Thor. That one you definitely know. But the Thor of Norse mythology is not exactly the same as the modern superhero. This Thor carries Mjolnir. He is associated with thunder. He protects gods and humans from dangerous beings. He is strong, direct, sometimes surprisingly funny. And his stories involve a world filled with giants, gods, dwarfs, strange creatures, and complicated relationships. Then there is Freya, associated with love, fertility, beauty, magic, and other aspects of life. Frigg, Loki, Tyr, Baldur, Heimdall, and many others. The Norse mythological world is crowded, and it is not especially tidy. The gods have complicated personalities. They make mistakes. They argue. They deceive one another. They form alliances. They lose things. They regain things. They behave badly. They sometimes behave honorably. It is, in other words, remarkably human. You listen as a storyteller describes one of the old tales. You cannot follow all of it, but you understand the general feeling. The universe is enormous. The gods are powerful, but even the gods face uncertainty. The stories are not always cheerful. They contain death, loss, failure, fate, but they also contain humor, trickery, friendship, cleverness, and strange situations that seem almost deliberately ridiculous. Loki in particular has a talent for creating problems, and then somehow creating even larger problems while trying to solve the first ones. Of course he does. You smile. The storyteller continues. The fire burns lower. Someone adds another piece of wood. The room brightens, then settles again. The shadows move across the wooden walls. You look up. The ceiling is dark. Smoke drifts toward the opening. You wonder what it would have been like to believe that the world truly contained these beings, not as fictional characters, but as part of the structure of reality. The gods were not merely stories. For people who followed Norse religious traditions, ritual and belief were woven into life. Offerings could be made. Sacred places existed. Certain ceremonies marked important moments. People sought protection, good harvests, success, fertility, victory, health. The relationship between humans and the supernatural was not separated into a special category called religion. It was part of life. The same person who fed the animals might also make an offering. The same household that stored grain might also tell stories about the gods. The same sailor who understood currents might still pray for favorable weather. There was no contradiction. Human beings have always combined practical knowledge with hope. You lie quietly. The story continues. The voices become softer. You begin to lose track of the words. Your mind drifts. You think about the day, the sheep, the fields, the ship, the sea, the food, the fire, the strange language. It has been a very long day, and tomorrow will probably be similar. That thought should perhaps sound boring. Instead, it is comforting. There is something peaceful about knowing what tomorrow roughly looks like. Wake, eat, work, rest, eat again, work, sleep, a simple rhythm. No constant stream of new information. No endless updates. No news alerts. No notifications. The world outside the longhouse is enormous, but you do not need to know everything happening in it. You only need to know what is happening here. The storyteller's voice becomes quieter. Someone nearby begins breathing heavily. A child has fallen asleep. The fire settles. The longhouse becomes darker. You pull the blanket closer. For a moment, you think about home. The thought is distant now. You remember lights, buildings, machines, cars, screens, soft mattresses, warm showers, refrigerators. You realize how strange all of those things would look to someone from this village. And then you realize how strange this village looks to you. Both worlds would probably consider the other one slightly ridiculous. That is the funny thing about history. We often imagine the past as primitive. But people in the past did not think of themselves as living in the past. They thought they were living in the present. They had problems that mattered to them. They had plans. They had ambitions. They had people they loved. They had people they disliked. They had jokes. They had fears. They had routines. They had hopes for tomorrow. The world felt normal because it was their world. You close your eyes. The fire crackles one last time. Someone whispers near the doorway. The wind moves outside. The sea is still there. And slowly, the longhouse settles into sleep. You breathe slowly. The warmth of the wool surrounds you. The wooden bench beneath you is still much harder than necessary, but you are tired enough not to care. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will learn more about the people here. Perhaps you will see how marriages are arranged, how families live, how children grow up, how status works, how people settle disagreements. And perhaps you will finally learn what everyone has been saying to you all day. Although, given the amount of pointing involved so far, it may simply mean, carry that. You smile faintly. The fire glows. The voices fade. The Viking village becomes quiet. And for tonight, you do not need to go anywhere. You can simply lie there. Listen to the wind. Listen to the distant sea. Listen to the soft breathing of the people around you. And let the strange northern night carry you gently toward sleep. Morning arrives slowly. There is no alarm. No bright digital clock telling you that you have exactly 7 minutes before you need to become a functional human being. Instead, you wait because someone has started moving around the longhouse. A piece of wood is added to the hearth. Someone coughs. A child whispers. An animal makes a noise outside that sounds deeply offended by the existence of morning. You open your eyes. For a few seconds, you forget where you are. Then you remember the Viking village. The wooden walls, the smoky air, the hard sleeping bench, and the sheep. You sit up. Someone nearby is already awake. The day is beginning again. You have now been here long enough to notice that mornings are not private at all. There is no separate bedroom, no quietly closing a door, no lying in bed scrolling through your phone for 20 minutes while pretending to wake up. The household wakes together, and once everyone is awake, the day begins. You eat something warm. Perhaps yesterday's food reheated near the fire. Perhaps porridge. Perhaps bread. Perhaps dairy. Whatever is available. Then you step outside. The air is cold. But today, you are slightly more prepared. You have your wool clothing. You know where the water is. You know where the firewood is. You know the general direction of the fields. You even know which sheep to distrust. Progress. As you walk to the village, you begin noticing something you did not fully appreciate yesterday. Almost everyone seems connected to someone else. A man speaks to a woman. They appear to be related. A child runs between two houses. Someone calls the child back. An older woman speaks to a younger man. The younger man listens. Families are everywhere. And family is not simply a private matter. In Viking Age society, kinship could be one of the most important structures in life. Your relatives could help you, protect you, support you, give you land, arrange marriages, defend your reputation, and occasionally create enormous complications. Because family trees can become surprisingly tangled. You may have parents, siblings, cousins, half-siblings, in-laws, step relations, and connections through marriage that somehow make everyone related to everyone else. This is especially important among wealthy families and elites. Marriage could connect powerful households. It could create alliances. It could strengthen property arrangements. It could improve social standing. And sometimes it could prevent conflict. Not always. Human beings have never been particularly good at preventing conflict simply by putting two families at the same wedding. But the idea was useful. Marriage could create bonds between groups. For ordinary farmers, marriage was also practical. A household needed labor. Children would eventually become workers. Land and property mattered. Livestock mattered. Family relationships mattered. A marriage could help a household survive. This does not mean people had no romantic feelings. They certainly did. People fell in love. People experienced attraction. People became jealous. People missed their partners. People wrote or composed poetry about love. People complained about their spouses, probably in approximately equal proportions. But romance existed inside a practical world. You pass a young couple standing near a fence. They are talking quietly. The woman laughs. The man smiles. For a moment, it looks almost exactly like a modern couple talking. The clothing is different. The surroundings are different. The language is different. But the expression is familiar. You realize that this is perhaps one of the most comforting things about history. People change, but people also remain remarkably similar. They still want affection. They still want respect. They still want security. They still want someone to listen to them. And they still occasionally marry someone their family wishes they had not. You walk farther. An older woman is sitting near the entrance of a house. She watches everyone. She seems to know everything. You recognize this type immediately. Every village has one, perhaps not literally the same person, but every community seems to have someone who knows everyone's business. She watches a man walk past. She watches a woman leave another house. She watches two children arguing. She notices you. You immediately look away. Too late. She has seen you. She says something. You smile politely. She says more. You nod. Apparently, this conversation is going nowhere, but perhaps she is asking where you are from. Travelers were interesting. A stranger arriving in a village was not something people ignored. The Viking world was connected through trade and travel, but small communities could still be intimate. A new person would be noticed. People might ask questions. Who are you? Whose family are you from? Where do you come from? Who can vouch for you? Why are you here? What do you want? In a society where reputation mattered, identity mattered too. You could not simply say, I'm from somewhere far away. People would want more. Your family mattered. Your ancestry mattered. Your social connections mattered. Your reputation mattered. And this is one reason genealogies became important. People remembered family lines. The famous Icelandic sagas, written centuries later, are filled with complicated genealogies and relationships. Some of these traditions probably preserved genuine memories. Others were shaped by storytelling. But the fascination with ancestry is clear. People wanted to know where they came from. You look at the village again. Perhaps one of the older men could tell you the story of every family here. Who founded the farm, who married whom, who moved away, who returned, who died, who inherited land, who caused trouble, who became wealthy, who lost everything, and who once stole a goat. The goat story would probably survive. You begin to wonder how inheritance works. Land is crucial. A farm is not simply a house. It is fields, pasture, animals, buildings, tools, rights, connections. A family's survival depends on what it controls. Inheritance could therefore create major tensions. Who receives a property? Which child? What happens if there are several children? What happens if there are sons and daughters? What happens if someone dies unexpectedly? What happens if a family has no direct heir? These questions matter, and Viking Age societies had legal systems designed to deal with disputes. This is where you encounter another important part of Viking life, the thing that popular culture sometimes forgets: law. The Vikings were not simply people who solved every disagreement by swinging an axe. They had assemblies. In Scandinavia, regional or local assemblies known as things were important institutions. People could gather to discuss disputes, make decisions, hear legal cases, and establish agreements. The exact systems varied by place and period, but law and public assemblies were significant. In Iceland, the Althing became particularly famous. It developed as a national assembly in the 10th century. The concept of law was deeply embedded in society. You could not simply assume that the strongest person automatically got whatever they wanted. Power certainly mattered. Wealth mattered. Connections mattered. But legal customs mattered too. And reputation mattered. If you had a reputation as an unreliable person, that could make future relationships difficult. So imagine waking up in a Viking village and getting into a disagreement with your neighbor. You cannot simply call the police. You cannot file an online complaint. You cannot post an angry review. You may need to resolve the matter through community structures, negotiation, compensation, mediation, legal proceedings, or, in some cases, escalation. The important point is that Viking society had rules. They were not living in a permanent state of chaos. You continue walking. The village feels orderly. Not modern orderly, but socially organized. People know where they belong. They know who has authority. They know who owns what. They know which obligations they have. And they know which families matter. This brings you back to marriage. Among wealthy families, marriage could be political. A ruler might marry someone from another powerful family. A chieftain might strengthen an alliance through marriage. A family might gain access to property or influence. And royal marriages could become especially complicated. Kings and rulers did not simply marry whoever they happened to meet at a market. Their marriages could affect alliances between kingdoms. A queen could come from another region. Her family could have its own political interests. Children could become heirs. Suddenly, a marriage becomes a matter of succession. And succession is where family trees become especially dangerous. Imagine a ruler dies. Who inherits? The eldest son? Another son? A brother? A nephew? Someone supported by powerful nobles? A claimant from another branch of the family? And suddenly, your peaceful little family tree becomes a political map. This is one reason Viking Age royal history can become confusing very quickly. The same names appear repeatedly. Harold, Eric, Olaf, Sven, Nud. There are multiple people with the same names. And when you add nicknames, fathers, mothers, half-siblings, and rival claimants, the whole thing becomes wonderfully inconvenient. Someone might be called Harold Bluetooth. Someone else might be Harold Fairair. Another person might be named Eric. Another Eric. And another Eric. Apparently, originality was not always a priority. You listen to a conversation nearby. Several names appear. You recognize none of them. Then someone mentions a family relationship. Another person responds. Then another. You have lost the plot. You decide that genealogy is not your strongest Viking skill. Fortunately, nobody is testing you. Yet, the family itself is also a workplace. Children help. Older people contribute knowledge. Women perform enormous amounts of labor. Men work in agriculture, fishing, trade, craft production, and other activities. The division of labor could vary greatly. Women were deeply involved in textile production, food preparation, household management, farming, and sometimes trade and other economic activities. Archaeological evidence also shows women could possess valuable objects and, in some circumstances, hold property or have significant economic roles. The old image of Viking society as entirely controlled by men is too simple. Women could have substantial responsibilities. Some could own or manage property. Some traveled. Some were involved in trade. Some became powerful figures. But society was still unequal. Gender expectations existed. Social class mattered. Freedom was not distributed equally. The same society that gave some women meaningful economic authority also contained slavery and strict hierarchies. History rarely gives us simple categories. You watch a woman working with a loom. The work is precise. The threads move. The pattern slowly forms. Textile production could be incredibly time-consuming. A good piece of cloth represented hours and hours of labor. And because cloth was so valuable, women involved in textile production were contributing directly to household wealth. The work might look ordinary, but it mattered. A family without clothing would have a serious problem. A ship without a sail would have a serious problem. A household without blankets would have a serious problem. So the person making the cloth was not merely doing crafts. She was helping keep the entire community functioning. You begin to notice how many essential tasks are performed by people whose names history did not preserve. Kings have names. Warriors have names. Explorers have names. But the person who spun the wool, the person who prepared the food, the person who repaired the child's shoes, the person who preserved the fish, often we do not know, and yet their labor made everything else possible. That is one of the quieter truths of the Viking Age. The famous people are only the visible part. Underneath them is a huge population of ordinary people doing ordinary work. You sit near the loom for a while. The rhythm is soothing. Thread, pull, tighten, repeat. The sound blends with the village. A child runs past. Someone calls out. The blacksmith's hammer sounds from the workshop. The sheep bleats. You look at it suspiciously. It looks back. You decide you have reached a diplomatic agreement. You will leave each other alone. For now, the afternoon passes. You help with another task. Then another. You are beginning to realize that there is no point asking what time it is. There is no clock. You judge time by the sun, by meals, by work, by the length of shadows. The rhythm feels slower, not necessarily easier, just slower. And as evening approaches, you return to the longhouse. The household gathers again. The fire is lit. Food is prepared. People talk. Someone tells another story. This time, you understand one word and name. You are not sure whose, but it feels like progress. Perhaps tomorrow you will understand another. Perhaps after a week, you will understand enough to stop nodding whenever someone speaks. Although you have to admit, the nodding strategy has worked surprisingly well. You sit near the fire. Around you are people who have lived their entire lives inside this network of family, work, land, memory, and obligation. Their world is not simple, but it is understandable to them. They know who they are. They know where they belong. They know who they can trust. They know which relationships matter. And they know that life depends on other people. You lie back. The fire warms your face. The long house grows quieter. You think about your own family. How many names you remember. How many stories? How many connections? And you realize that people 1,000 years ago probably thought about their families in much the same way. Who came before? Who is here now? Who will come next? That simple chain connects you to them. The centuries suddenly feel a little less distant. You close your eyes. The voices become soft. The fire crackles. Outside, the cold settles over the village. Inside, people sleep close together. And somewhere in the darkness, that same sheep is probably planning another escape. You decide not to worry about it. Not tonight. When you wake the next morning, the village feels different. Not dramatically different. There is no army approaching. No dragon has appeared. Nobody is shouting about the end of the world. It is simply busier. There are more people near the shoreline. Several unfamiliar voices can be heard outside. And there's a smell you have not noticed before. Something sharper. Salter. Strange. You sit up. Someone near the entrance is speaking quickly. Another person answers. You still understand almost nothing. But this time, you can tell what is happening. Visitors have arrived. And visitors mean trade. You get dressed and step outside. The shoreline is crowded. A ship has come in. It is not necessarily enormous. But compared with the small boats used around the village, it looks substantial. People are unloading goods. Bundles. Barrels. Sacks. Wooden containers. Pieces of cloth. And something wrapped carefully in leather. You stand at a distance. Everyone seems interested. This is not just because strangers are entertaining. A ship arriving means opportunity. It means goods, news, and perhaps something the village has been waiting for. Trade was a major part of Viking Age life. The popular image of Vikings often focuses on raiding, but trade was enormously important. Scandinavian merchants participated in networks stretching across Europe and beyond. They traded furs, hides, iron, walrus ivory, amber, fish, slaves, weapons, textiles, silver, and many other goods. They acquired things that were difficult to produce locally: spices, fine textiles, glass, ceramics, jewelry, luxury goods, and above all, silver. Silver was one of the great currencies of the Viking world. You may encounter silver coins from many different regions. Arab dirhams, Frankish coins, English coins, German coins, and others. They could travel enormous distances. A coin minted far away could eventually end up buried in Scandinavia. And archaeological discoveries have revealed just how extensive these networks were. You watch a merchant open a small container. Inside are coins. They catch the light. You recognize one. It is clearly not from here. The man holding it seems pleased. Silver had practical value, but it also had symbolic value. Wealth could be displayed through jewelry, rings, bracelets, necklaces, brooches. Coins could be cut into pieces. Silver could be weighed. The exact form of payment depended on circumstances. This is a world where weight matters. You might not always hand over one standardized coin and receive standardized change. Instead, silver could be weighed and valued. A merchant might have scales, small weights, pieces of metal. The system was flexible. You watch someone place silver on a scale. Tiny weights sit nearby. The process is careful. Nothing is casual. Silver is valuable. A small amount can represent significant wealth. You begin to understand something else. The people here are not isolated farmers. They are part of an international network. That phrase sounds almost absurd when you look around. The village is made of timber. The roads are muddy. The fields are small. And yet someone here might own an object made hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. The world is connected, just slowly. A merchant shows a piece of fabric. It looks different from the woolen clothing you've seen. Finer, lighter, perhaps brightly colored. People gather around. Imported textiles could be valuable. Silk was especially prestigious. Silk traveled through enormous trade networks from the Byzantine world and Islamic regions. Finding silk in Viking Age graves has helped archaeologists understand how far goods could travel. You touch the fabric. It is incredibly soft. You look at your wool clothing, then back at the silk. You suddenly understand why someone would travel a very long distance to obtain it. The merchant smiles. He knows he has something people want. This is how trade works. You want what I have. I want what you have. We negotiate. Someone eventually gets slightly annoyed. Everyone pretends a final price is fair, and the transaction is completed. You are beginning to recognize a pattern. The village is not just consuming goods. It is participating in exchange. Perhaps a farmer brings hides. A fisherman brings dried fish. A craftsman brings tools. A merchant brings silver. A trader brings cloth. Each person has something valuable, and trade connect them. You follow the visitors. Someone is showing them the settlement. You notice their clothing. Some differences are subtle. Others are obvious. They come from another place. Perhaps another Scandinavian region. Perhaps farther away. Their accents are different. Their styles are different. Their goods are different. But everyone understands the basic principles of bargaining. This is something humans have always been very good at. Wanting more. Offering less. Pretending not to care. Then suddenly caring very much. You watch two men negotiating over an object. One holds it. The other points at a different item. They speak. The first man shakes his head. The second man shrugs. They continue. You cannot understand words, but you understand a negotiation perfectly. Eventually they agree. Hands are shaken. The object changes ownership. The entire thing looks remarkably modern, except nobody is standing behind a cash register. You wander farther. There are animals being exchanged too. Horses can be valuable. Cattle, sheep, goats. Animal wealth is portable in a different way. A healthy horse can be worth a great deal. And horses were important in Viking Age society. They provided transportation. They could be used in farming. They had symbolic value. They were associated with status. Horses also appear prominently in Norse mythology. Odin's horse, Sleipnir, famously has 8 legs, which seems excessive, for legs already work perfectly well. But mythology has never been particularly concerned with engineering efficiency. You hear someone mention a horse's lineage. Again, family matters. A good animal has value. People pay attention to breeding. Health, strength, temperament. You watch a man inspect a horse. He checks its teeth, its legs, its movement, its body. You remember modern car buyers checking mileage. Different technology. Same general principle. Is this thing reliable? You move toward another group. Someone is selling metalwork, knives, tools, perhaps small weapons. Iron is valuable because it is useful, but producing good iron objects requires skill. A blacksmith can turn raw material into something that makes farming easier. A good tool can save labor. A good knife can be used every day. A strong axe can help with wood. A reliable agricultural implement can affect an entire household. So tools are not just objects, they are productivity. A village with good tools can do more work. And a skilled blacksmith is therefore extremely important. You begin to see the economic system more clearly. Farmers produce food. Craftspeople produce goods. Fishermen produce fish. Traders move goods. Shipbuilders create transportation. Blacksmiths produce tools. Everyone depends on everyone else. The village is an ecosystem. You watch a woman examining a piece of jewelry. It is made from silver. Perhaps there is a simple design. Perhaps a more elaborate pattern. Jewelry could be used as decoration, but it could also display wealth and status. A large silver arm ring was not simply pretty. It could announce that the wearer had resources. It might also have practical value as a form of wealth. This is another important feature of Viking Age society. People carried wealth on their bodies. In a world without modern bank accounts, wealth could be physical. You could see it, touch it, weigh it, hide it, steal it, bury it, and people did bury it. Archaeologists have found enormous hoards of Viking Age silver and other valuables. Why were they buried? We cannot always know. Some may have been hidden for safekeeping. Some may have been ritual deposits. Some may have been buried during uncertain times and never recovered. Imagine burying your savings. You choose a location, perhaps near your house, perhaps somewhere you think only you know. You cover it. You remember the place. Then life happens. You travel. You die. You forget, or simply never return. Centuries later, someone finds it. This is how archaeology occasionally receives gifts from people who had no intention of becoming archaeologists. You walk along the edge of the settlement. A trader has brought something especially strange. Glass beads, bright colors, blue, green, yellow, perhaps imported from distant workshops. They are small, beautiful, and clearly different from the local materials. People gather around them. A child reaches toward one. An adult gently moves the child hand away. Not yours. You understand, even without the language. The beads may be used in jewelry. They may be traded again. They may travel farther. An object can pass through several hands. Each person adds a little value. This is commerce. You begin to think about distance. How did all these things travel? By ship, by river, by road, by caravan, by foot. Viking Age trade networks were particularly connected to rivers in Eastern Europe. Scandinavian travelers could move through waterways that connected the Baltic region to the Black Sea and beyond. Places such as Novgorod and Kiev became important centers in these networks. The Byzantine Empire was another major destination. Constantinople, known in the Norse world as Miklagar, was an enormous city. To someone from a small Scandinavian settlement, it would have been astonishing. Stone buildings, crowds, markets, churches, palaces, fortifications, thousands upon thousands of people. The scale would be difficult to imagine. Some Scandinavians traveled there. Some served as warriors in the Byzantine Emperor's Varangian Guard. Others traded. Others settled. Some returned home with stories. You look around your small village, and then imagine someone from here arriving in Constantinople. It would be like stepping onto another planet. The streets would be crowded. Languages would be everywhere. Goods from distant lands would be displayed. Silk, spices, precious metals, glass, wine, perfumes, fine weapons, religious objects. The Viking world was connected to all of this, but most people in the village would never see it. That is another historical contrast. A single merchant might travel thousands of kilometers. A farmer might never travel more than a few days from home. Both lived in the same society. Both contributed to its economy. The traveler brought back stories. The farmer produced food. Neither was unimportant. You return to the shoreline. The trading activity continues. A group of people are preparing to leave. Cargo is being loaded onto the ship. The atmosphere changes. People become more focused. Everything must fit. Food, water, goods, tools, personal belongings, perhaps animals. The ship cannot carry everything. Weight matters. Space matters. Balance matters. The sea does not care about your business plan. Too much weight in the wrong place can affect the ship, so the cargo must be arranged carefully. You watch as someone places a heavy bundle low in the hull. Another is moved closer to the center. The sailors know what they are doing. Again, experience. Knowledge passed from one generation to another. The ship will leave soon. People say goodbye. Some are casual. Some are more emotional. Travel is uncertain. A journey could take days or weeks. People might not know exactly when someone will return. That makes departure different. Today, if someone leaves for another country, you can call them, message them, track their flight, see their location. In the Viking Age, you might simply watch the ship disappear, then wait and wait, perhaps months, perhaps longer. You wonder what it would feel like to leave home knowing that communication was impossible. No letters arriving tomorrow, no quick message, no way to check whether someone had arrived safely. Travel required trust and courage. The ship begins moving. Oars enter the water. Slowly, rhythmically, the vessel turns. The sail is prepared. The wind catches it. The ship moves farther away. The village watches. You watch too. The ship becomes smaller, then smaller. Eventually, it is little more than a dark shape against the horizon. You remain standing. The sea looks enormous. You suddenly understand why these sailors needed such confidence. There is no road, no signpost, just water. And somewhere beyond that water, another shore, another community, another market, another set of people who have never heard of your village. Yet they are connected through silver, through ships, through stories, through trade, through people willing to cross the sea. You return to the village. The visitors are gone. The shoreline is quieter. The ordinary rhythm returns. Someone goes back to fishing. Someone returns to the fields. The blacksmith goes back to work. The loom continues. The animals continue their endless search for food. And you realize that the Viking world is much larger than this village. But the village is still the center of your world. For night, anyway, you sit near the fire. Someone places a small silver object on the table. Perhaps it came from the traders. Perhaps it is old. Perhaps it will be traded again tomorrow. You look at it, a tiny piece of metal, but it carries a huge story. Someone mined the raw material. Someone shaped it. Someone traded it. Someone carried it across the sea. Someone bought it. Someone lost it. Someone found it. And now you are sitting beside it, 1,000 years later. You smile at the absurdity. History can be very quiet. Sometimes it is a king. Sometimes it is a ship. And sometimes it is just a little piece of silver sitting on a wooden table. The fire crackles. The longhouse grows warmer. Outside, the evening settles over the village. Tomorrow there will be more work, more animals, more food, more repairs, more stories, and perhaps another ship. But for now, you can simply sit, listen to the fire, listen to the voices, and imagine the enormous world beyond the dark shoreline. A world connected by water, silver, wood, and people who were willing to go somewhere they had never been before. The morning begins quietly, which is suspicious. After several days in the village, you have learned that quiet mornings usually mean everyone is saving their energy for something. You sit near the hearth. Breakfast is simple. Warm grain, a little dairy, some bread, perhaps fish. You eat slowly. Across the room, people are talking. The tone is different today. Less casual, more focused. Someone mentions a name. Another person responds. Then another. You look around. Something is happening. You still cannot understand the language properly, but you can recognize the general feeling. There is a disagreement. And apparently, you are about to learn how Viking society dealt with one. You follow the group outside. Several people are preparing to leave the settlement. They are not carrying weapons for battle. They are carrying themselves like people going somewhere important. Someone has a document, not paper in the modern sense, perhaps a wooden object or other physical evidence. People are gathering. You realize they are heading toward an assembly, a thing. The word sounds simple. The institution was not. Assemblies were important parts of Scandinavian legal and political life. People could gather to settle disputes, discuss matters, hear legal cases, make decisions, confirm agreements, and, depending on the place and period, discuss larger political questions. This was not a courtroom in the modern sense. There was no judge in a black robe, no jury box, no lawyer standing dramatically and saying, "Your Honor," although someone probably did make dramatic speeches. People are people. Instead, legal knowledge was held by people who knew the law. In Iceland, the law speaker was particularly important. The law speaker had a remarkable role. Much of the law was remembered orally. That meant someone had to know it. Imagine having a job where your main responsibility is remembering a huge amount of legal material and publicly reciting it. No laptop, no printed legal code, no search function, just memory. You would probably want to be very confident in your brain, and preferably not have a bad morning. You walk with the others. The landscape opens up. People are arriving from different directions. Some on foot, some on horseback, perhaps with carts, perhaps with goods, perhaps with relatives. The gathering is larger than you expected. This is not simply a village meeting. It is a social event. People meet old friends, trade goods, exchange news, discuss disputes, arrange business, make alliances, and naturally talk about other people. An assembly could be political, economic, legal, social, all at once. The same place where someone might settle a property dispute could also become a place for trading livestock. Someone might meet a future spouse. Someone else might hear news from another region. A traveler might tell stories about distant events. This is a world without separate categories. Politics, business, family, and law overlap. You find a place to stand. A man begins speaking. His voice carries. People listen. You do not understand every word, but you recognize the seriousness. The dispute seems to involve property, perhaps land, perhaps livestock, perhaps an obligation that someone failed to fulfill. These things mattered enormously. Land was wealth. Animals were wealth. Reputation was wealth. And losing any of them could damage a family. The people involved present their arguments. Others speak. Witnesses may be called. Evidence may be discussed. The exact legal processes varied across Viking Age societies, and surviving sources come from different periods. But the general idea is clear. Law mattered, custom mattered, and disputes could be handled through formal social mechanisms. This is important because the popular Viking stereotype can be misleading. Imagine a society where everyone carries an axe and solves every disagreement with violence. Such a society would be extremely difficult to maintain. You could not build farms. You could not trade. You could not maintain ships. You could not raise children. You could not plan long-term. If every argument immediately became a fight, the community would collapse. So societies develop rules. And the Vikings had rules. They could be harsh. They could be unequal. They could favor powerful people. But they existed. And people knew that breaking certain rules could have consequences. One major consequence could involve compensation. Instead of revenge, someone might be required to pay. This is a very old principle. If you harm someone or damage their property, you owe compensation. The amount could depend on the offense and the status of the people involved. This could help prevent endless cycles of revenge, because revenge is expensive. If one person harms another, the victim's family may retaliate. Then the first family retaliates again. Then another person gets involved. Then another. And suddenly, a small disagreement has become a family problem that lasts for generations. This is a feud. And Viking Age societies knew them very well. Feuds could be complicated. They could involve insults, property disputes, violence, marriage problems, inheritance, political rivalry, and wounded pride. Pride, naturally, being one of humanity's most expensive hobbies. You hear a story about a feud. The details are complicated. Someone insulted someone else. Someone demanded compensation. The payment was refused. Another person became involved. Then another. Eventually, families became enemies. You listen. The story sounds almost absurd, but the consequences could be serious. That is why settlements mattered. If both sides could agree to compensation, marriage alliances, or another solution, the conflict could end. This required negotiation. And negotiation required reputation. A person known for keeping agreements was valuable. A person known for breaking promises was dangerous. A powerful leader could help settle disputes. A respected family could provide support. And social pressure could be enormous. In a small community, you cannot simply disappear. Everyone knows you. Everyone knows your family. Everyone knows what happened. You begin to appreciate why reputation mattered so much. Your name was a kind of social currency. You wanted people to believe you were trustworthy, honorable, capable, reliable. If you were known as a liar or oath-breaker, your relationships could suffer. This brings us to another important feature of Viking Age culture: honor. The word is often used too dramatically. Honor was not necessarily some abstract obsession that caused everyone to challenge each other duels. It could be much more practical. It involved reputation. How others saw you, whether you kept promises, whether you defended your family, whether you fulfilled obligations, whether you behaved appropriately, and whether people believed you were someone worth respecting. Insults could therefore matter. A public insult was not simply rude. It could damage reputation. And in some circumstances, it could provoke conflict. Poetry could be used as a weapon too. Skalds or poets could compose verses praising or insulting people. A clever poem could preserve someone's reputation. A cruel poem could embarrass them. Imagine living in a world where someone could publicly roast you in verse, and people would remember the poem for generations. At least modern embarrassing posts can sometimes be deleted. Mostly. Here, the poet might be the archive. You listen to someone reciting a verse. The language is unfamiliar, but the audience reacts. Some laugh. Some look uncomfortable. The person being mentioned does not look pleased. You suspect this is a Viking equivalent of an insult disguised as art. You sit quietly. Better not get involved. The assembly continues. Eventually, a decision is reached. You do not understand exactly what it is, but the tension seems to decrease. People begin talking normally again. Someone shakes hands. Another person walks away. The dispute is finished. At least for now. You are impressed. Not because the process was perfect. It was not, but because the community had a mechanism for dealing with conflict. Civilization, you realize, is partly the art of finding ways to avoid killing each other over every disagreement. That sounds simple. It is not. Every society has to solve it. Who owns this? Who owes that? Who broke the agreement? Who inherits the property? Who has the right to use this land? Who is responsible? What happens when someone dies? What happens when someone lies? These questions are ancient. The answers change. The questions remain. You walk around the assembly area. People are trading. A horse is being examined. A man is selling tools. Someone has brought cloth. Another person is discussing a marriage. Children are running around. A storyteller has gathered a small crowd. This is beginning to look less like a legal meeting and more like a festival. That is probably because it is a little of both. People need opportunities to gather. In a society where communication is slow, face-to-face meetings are incredibly important. You cannot simply send a message to someone living 50 kilometers away. If you need to discuss something important, you may need to travel. So assemblies create opportunities. Law, trade, politics, socializing, everything together. You begin to understand why travel mattered so much. Not everyone was constantly sailing across oceans, but people moved. Farmers went to markets. Families visited relatives. Merchants traveled. Leaders traveled. People attended assemblies, and news traveled with them. This creates a network. Not fast, not precise, but real. You return toward the village in the afternoon. The walk feels familiar now. You recognize landmarks. A particular tree, a stream, a hill, a fence, a path. You are slowly learning the landscape. That matters. When you live in one place for years, the environment becomes part of your memory. You know where the berries grow, where the animals wander, where the ground becomes muddy, where the path floods, where the best firewood can be found, where the boats are pulled up, where the snow disappears first in spring. You know the land, and the land knows you, in the only sense that land can know anything. It has shaped your habits. You reach the village. Someone is repairing a fence. You help. Of course, there's always a fence. As you work, you think about the assembly. The modern world often imagines the Vikings as chaotic, but their world was structured, not perfectly, not equally, not peacefully all the time, but structured. They had laws, they had customs, they had assemblies, they had leaders, they had agreements, they had expectations, they had consequences, and they had people who spent their lives remembering how all of it worked. You sit near the house afterward. The sun is lower. A child is playing nearby. Someone is grinding grain. Someone is preparing food. The village returns to its normal rhythm. The argument from the morning already feels distant. This is another thing communities need, the ability to move on. If every disagreement remained alive forever, daily life would become impossible. People have to wake up the next morning, work together, trade, eat, raise children, repair buildings. Even after arguments, sometimes forgiveness, sometimes compromise, sometimes simply deciding that it is better to tolerate your neighbor than to spend the next 10 years fighting him. This is perhaps one of the most underrated achievements of human civilization. Tolerating people you find irritating. You look across the village. The same man you saw arguing this morning is now talking to someone else. They may not be friends, but the world has continued. The fire still burns. The animals still need food. The fields still need work. Life goes on. That evening, you sit in the longhouse again. The familiar warmth surrounds you. Someone tells a story. Someone else repairs clothing. A child falls asleep near the hearth. The fire crackles. You think about the strange journey you have taken. You woke up in an unfamiliar world. You did not understand the language. You did not know the customs. You did not know the people. And yet, little by little, you have learned. You know how the village works. You know where the water is. You know where the boats are. You know how food is stored. You know that family matters. You know that reputation matters. You know that law matters. You know that trade connects this small settlement to an enormous world. And you know that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply avoid turning an argument into a feud. You lie down. The wooden bench is still hard. You have stopped expecting otherwise. The blanket is warm. The fire is low. Outside, the night has settled over the settlement. You listen to the wind. The village becomes quiet. And you think about how much of human life is simply the process of learning how to live alongside other people. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but well enough to raise children, well enough to share land, well enough to trade, well enough to settle disagreements, well enough to build houses, well enough to build ships, well enough to pass stories from one generation to the next. That is how a society survives, not through constant excitement, through repetition, through memory, through rules, through cooperation, and through millions of small decisions made by ordinary people. The fire flickers. Your eyes grow heavy. Tomorrow will bring another ordinary day. Perhaps you will work in the fields. Perhaps you will help with the boats. Perhaps another trader will arrive. Perhaps someone will tell another story. Perhaps the sheep will escape again. You sigh. Some traditions are apparently eternal. You close your eyes. The village settles into sleep. The sea moves quietly beyond the houses, and the northern night passes slowly over the roofs. The next morning, you wake before anyone calls you. For a moment, you simply lie there. The longhouse is dim. The fire has burned down to a soft bed of embers. Around you, people are still sleeping. Someone turns over. A child makes a small noise and settles again. Outside, the wind moves gently against the wooden walls. And for the first time since you arrived, you do not immediately wonder where you are. You already know. You are in the Viking village. It feels strangely familiar now. The hard sleeping bench, the smoky air, the wool blanket, the faint smell of yesterday's fire. Even the distant sounds of animals outside have become recognizable. You sit up. There is no schedule waiting for you. No message. No notification. No list of tasks glowing on a screen. There is simply morning. And slowly, the village wakes. Someone gets up. Someone adds wood to the hearth. Someone begins preparing food. A woman steps outside. A man checks the animals. A child follows him. The day begins in exactly the same quiet way it has begun before. And perhaps that is the most interesting part of your entire journey. You came here expecting the Viking Age to feel strange. And it does. The buildings are strange. The clothes are strange. The technology is strange. The food is different. The language is different. The beliefs are different. But the daily rhythm is not as strange as you expected. People wake up. They eat. They work. They get tired. They argue. They laugh. They worry. They make plans. They care about their families. They hope tomorrow will be better. You step outside. The morning air is cold. The sky is pale. Mist hangs over the water. The village looks almost peaceful. You walk toward the shoreline. The sea is calm. The long ship from several days ago is gone. Only a few smaller boats remain. One is being repaired. A man is working carefully along its side. You recognize him. He was here the first time you came down to the water. You stop beside him. He says something. You still cannot understand all of it, but now you recognize a few words. You answer with the little language you have learned. He smiles. It is not a long conversation, but it feels strangely important. You have spent only a short time here, yet somehow you have become part of the scenery. Not a local, not really, but no longer completely strange. You help him for a while. The work is simple. Hold this, move that, pass the rope, keep the wood steady. It is repetitive and strangely relaxing. The ship is not glamorous up close. It is a machine made of wood. Every part requires maintenance. Every rope matters. Every plank matters. Every repair extends its life. You run your hand along the hull. You think about what these ships allowed people to do. They crossed seas, connected communities, carried goods, carried families, carried stories. They made distant places reachable. Without them, the Viking world would have been much smaller. The sea would have been a barrier. Instead, it became a highway. You look toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond it are other settlements, other farms, other islands, other kingdoms, other people waking up just as you did. Perhaps somewhere far away, another longhouse is beginning its morning. Someone there is lighting a fire. Someone is preparing food. Someone is complaining about the weather. Someone is probably looking for a missing tool. It is comforting to imagine. The world is enormous, but ordinary life repeats everywhere. You leave the shore. The village is already busy. Today you help in the fields. You have learned enough now that nobody needs to explain every movement. You carry something. You follow someone. You work. The task is not complicated, but it is physical. You feel the effort in your shoulders, in your back, in your legs, and suddenly you understand something modern people sometimes forget. Almost everything in this village requires the body. Walking requires the body. Carrying water requires the body. Cutting wood requires the body. Grinding grain requires the body. Building requires the body. Farming requires the body. Cooking requires the body. Cleaning requires the body. Even staying warm requires work. Modern life has removed enormous amounts of physical labor from everyday existence. That is convenient, very convenient. You appreciate it deeply. But there is another side. Here, the physical world is impossible to ignore. You know when you are tired. You know when you are hungry. You know when the weather changes. You know exactly how much work is left. The body gives you information constantly. You continue working. At midday, you eat. The food is simple, but you are hungry, so it tastes good. You sit with several people. Conversation flows around you. You understand more now. Not everything, but enough. Someone asks you something. You answer. Someone laughs. You are not entirely sure why. You laugh too. This is how language works sometimes. You do not need perfect grammar to understand a smile. After lunch, you help with another task. Then another. The afternoon passes. Slowly, the sun moves across the sky. Shadows lengthen. The field becomes golden. Smoke rises from the houses. The village is beautiful in a quiet way. Not because it is perfect. It is not. There is mud. There are animals. There is smoke. There are smells you would probably prefer not to investigate. There are hard surfaces everywhere. There is very little privacy. Medical care is limited. Food shortages can happen. Winter can be brutal. Childbirth can be dangerous. Infection can become serious. Life expectancy was shaped by high infant and childhood mortality. Violence existed. Slavery existed. Social inequality existed. This was not some peaceful Scandinavian paradise. It was a difficult world. But difficult does not mean meaningless. People still lived full emotional lives. They formed friendships. They loved their children. They mourned their dead. They celebrated marriages. They enjoyed feasts. They listened to stories. They admired beautiful objects. They made jokes. They complained. They dreamed. They remembered. They hoped. That is what you have gradually discovered. The Viking Age was not simply a collection of raids and warriors. It was made of ordinary days, thousands upon thousands of them. Most people did not spend their lives charging into battle. They spent their lives doing things that almost never make it into dramatic movies. Growing food, making clothing, repairing roofs, fishing, trading, raising children, building boats, looking after animals, preparing for winter. Try and make sure everyone had enough to eat. That is history too. As the afternoon ends, you return to the village. The longhouse is already warm. Someone is preparing the evening meal. You sit near the entrance. For a while, you simply watch. You know these people now. Not personally, exactly, but enough to recognize them. The man who works on boats. The woman who spins wool. The older person who seems to know everything. The children who run everywhere. The trader who arrived with silver. The farmer who spends most of his day with the animals. And, of course, the sheep. You look toward the enclosure. The sheep looks back. You have developed a complicated relationship. You do not trust it. It does not trust you. There is mutual respect. You sit near the fire. Dinner arrives. People gather. The room becomes warmer. Conversation grows. Someone begins telling a story. This time, you understand enough to follow. It is about a journey. A man traveled far from home. He crossed the sea. He visited another land. He saw strange buildings. He met unfamiliar people. He returned with goods and stories. The audience listens. You listen too, and suddenly you realize that you have become part of the story, not the story being told. Your own story. You came here knowing almost nothing. Now you know the smell of a longhouse. You know the feeling of a wooden boat moving beneath your feet. You know how cold the morning air can be. You know how heavy a bucket becomes after walking a long distance. You know the rhythm of spinning wool. You know how silver looks when it catches firelight. You know that law can matter as much as strength. You know that family can be both comforting and complicated. You know that a ship can make an entire world feel smaller. And you know that a sheep can apparently become a recurring problem across centuries. The storyteller finishes. People talk quietly. Someone adds wood to the fire. The flames rise. For a while, nobody says anything. The silence is comfortable. You lean back. The night outside is dark. You think about the modern world again. Cars moving through cities. Lights everywhere. Millions of people online. Messages traveling around the planet in seconds. Airplanes crossing oceans. Satellites moving overhead. You realize how astonishing that world would seem to these people. And then you think about your own reaction to this village. You arrived thinking it was primitive. Now that word feels too simple. They lacked many technologies you take for granted, but they possessed knowledge you do not have. They knew how to read weather, how to work wood, how to preserve food, how to navigate, how to build ships, how to make clothing, how to survive winter, how to recognize useful plants, how to manage animals, how to remember laws without books. Every society develops expertise according to the problems it faces. You know how to operate a computer. They knew how to survive without one. You know how to navigate with GPS. They knew how to navigate by landscape, sea, sky, and memory. You know how to buy food from a supermarket. They knew how to preserve enough food to survive months without one. Neither world is simply smarter. They are adapted to different circumstances. The fire burns lower. People begin preparing for sleep. One by one, conversations fade. The children disappear into their sleeping places. The animals outside become quieter. You step outside one final time. The village is dark. Only a few fires remain. Above you, the sky is enormous. Stars fill it. There is no city glow, no street lights, no airplane trails, just darkness and stars. You stand there for a long moment. The sea is barely visible. You can hear it, soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. You realize that this may be the most peaceful moment of your entire journey. Not because the Viking Age was peaceful. It was not. But because right now, this tiny corner of it is quiet. You breathe in the cold air. Then you return to the longhouse. Your sleeping place is waiting. You lie down. The bench is still hard. You smile. At this point, you would probably be disappointed if it were comfortable. You pull the blanket over yourself. The fire glows nearby. Someone whispers. Someone coughs. The wooden walls creak. The wind moves outside. You close your eyes. And you think about the question you started with. What if you woke up in a Viking village? Well, now you know. You would probably be confused. You would probably be cold. You would probably be hungry. You would almost certainly miss modern plumbing. You would have absolutely no idea what anyone was saying. You would have to learn quickly. You would work more physically than you ever expected. You would discover that Vikings were not simply warriors. You would meet farmers, fishermen, craftspeople, merchants, parents, children, storytellers, law speakers, travelers, and people who were simply trying to get through another winter. You would discover that the Viking world was connected to places far beyond Scandinavia. Silver could arrive from the Islamic world. Silk could come from distant regions. Goods could travel through rivers and across oceans. Stories could travel with merchants. People could travel farther than you imagined possible. And yet, despite all this movement, most lives remain local. A person might spend most of their life within a familiar landscape. Their world was small in geography, but large in meaning. The village was home. The family was identity. The farm was security. The sea was opportunity. The seasons were the calendar. The stories were the memory. And the fire was the center. You listen to it now. The gentle crackle. The warmth. The quiet. Your breathing becomes slower. The village is almost completely asleep. Tomorrow, everyone will wake again. The fire will be rebuilt. Food will be prepared. Animals will be fed. Boats will be repaired. Fields will be worked. Wool will be spun. Children will run outside. People will argue about something. Someone will laugh. Someone will tell a story. Someone will look toward the sea. And life will continue. That is perhaps the greatest lesson of the Viking village. History does not always move dramatically. Most of the time, it simply continues. One morning, then another. One harvest, then another. One generation, then another. People live. People work. People love. People age. People die. And the next generation takes their place. The houses change. The boats change. The language changes. The beliefs change. But the basic rhythm remains. Wake, work, eat, rest, sleep. You slowly drift toward sleep. The fire becomes a blur of orange light. The wooden walls become shadows. The sea continues beyond the village. Somewhere far away, another settlement is sleeping beneath the same sky. And perhaps, Centuries from now, someone will uncover a piece of silver, a broken comb, a tool, a bead, a fragment of wood, something that once belonged to an ordinary person. They will look at it. They will wonder who owned it, who touched it, who carried it, who lost it, and they will never know your name. That is all right. Most people in history were never remembered by name, but they lived. They mattered to someone. They built something. They cared for someone. They left traces. And because of those traces, we can still sit quietly and imagine their world. The village fades into darkness. The fire becomes smaller. The sea becomes softer. Your breathing slows. The last sounds of the longhouse disappear. And for a little while, there is nothing left to do. No work, no travel, no trade, no law, no arguments, no sheep, just the quiet northern night. You close your eyes. The story has taken you across fields, through a longhouse, beside the sea, onto a ship, into markets, around an assembly, and finally back to the warmth of fire. And now the village is sleeping, so you can sleep too. Good night.